Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight. I'm your host, David Collis. I want to shout out to my audience. Thank you for listening. You're the lifeblood of my show. Also, I would like you to please click the Nightlight Blog Talk Radio follow button and click the subscribe button on my Nightlight YouTube channel. That helps me know you're listening. Plus, you'll get all the updates. My guest tonight is Kaarin Alisa. She is the best-selling author of Journey of a Prophet. She is also a spiritual advisor, clinical hypnotherapist, teacher, and energy practitioner. She has two soon-to-be-released books on Amazon. The first, Mary and Joseph, An Uncommon Couple, and the second is 111 Quotes of Wisdom from Jesus. Welcome to the show, Kaarin.
Thank you, David. It's so good to be here with you.
This is fantastic.
Me too. I'm really looking forward to it.
You know, you've got this fantastic book, The Journey of a Prophet, and in it there was so much information in there that was all very new to me when I read it, and yet at the same time there's a lot of similarities. You know, I was the author of Interviewing Jesus the Man, and one of the things that I was interested in exploring was his those missing years. And in the Journey of the Prophet, you really explored that time. But you seem to have done it in a very different way than the way that I did it. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about your relationship with Jesus and how you came to him, or how he came to you.
Yeah, sure. Actually, that is the truth of it. He came to me when I was a little girl. I grew up in very difficult circumstances. You know, on the outside, it might have looked like an idyllic childhood, but it was not. A lot of abuse, and I spent a lot of time in my room crying and just feeling bereft. He came to my bed one evening, sat down on the bed with me, and began talking, and we forged a relationship over those years. He would help me when I was laying there in the bed crying. Sometimes he would pat my head. Sometimes he would sing me a song. Sometimes we'd just talk. But all in all, it was his constancy, his straightforward nature, his love that kept me going all those years. There were a few years during this long life that I've lived that I ignored him for one reason or another, but he was always there and always came back whenever I asked for him. Now, in the 1980s, I was a trance channeler and he was one of the beings that I would trance channel for people. But I stopped trance channeling after a while and just got to where he and I would just talk. We would just talk, and I talk with him almost every day. So the Journey of a Prophet is a collaboration between Jesus, I call him Yeshua, So collaboration between Yeshua and I regarding his life. So it's the first 40 years of his life while he was walking in a physical body here on this earth plane. And everything that he's told me has gone, well, not everything, but most of the things he's told me have gone into the book.
You made a very interesting reference to the fact that he lived for 40 years, and that definitely is different than what you would find in the New Testament.
Oh, definitely, definitely. He was in his 38th year, according to him, at the time of the crucifixion. So he was actually born in the year 5 A.D., and so even though that event took place in the 33rd year of our calendar, he was actually 38 years at that time. And he stayed around on this earth plane in a very physical-like body for a couple of years after that, helping everybody that he loved and cared for get on with the work that they were going to get on with. But then he moved back into the dimension that he's living in now.
That's another bombshell here. So in the New Testament, again, we see that Jesus resurrected and that he would appear to several people, but it seems as though that was for a very short period of time. In fact, once you start the book of Acts, Jesus ascended, and so we really don't know at what point he ascended versus at what point he was crucified and then he was resurrected. So you're saying that there's roughly around 5 years?
It was a couple of years. It was a couple of years.
Couple of years.
Yeah, and the resurrection event didn't go down really in the way, according to Yeshua, it didn't go down in the way that it's presented in our common mythology, if you will.
Okay, so now that raises all kinds of new issues too, because this is what I was dealing with, is that, you have the Gospels, and we have to ask ourselves, what's the purpose of the Gospels? What are they trying to tell us? And I found myself asking myself, what's there? And then just as importantly, what's not there. But you're now kind of filling in some blanks here, and you are saying that there's some information about Jesus that differs from what is in the New Testament Gospel. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. And I want to preface what I'm about to say with, when I began writing this book, I was definitely of the belief that 99% of what's in the New Testament was wrong. And now I don't believe that. I believe that much of it is quite based in truth. But there are some misconceptions. There are some outright inconsistencies with truth. And then there's, some things that were just made up by the church. So the crucifixion, well, here's the bombshell. He didn't die on the cross. He was still alive when they took him down from the cross. According to Yeshua, because when he was in the East, living in the East, at one of the temples that he learned lots of wonderful things. One of the things he learned was how to take his body down to a state where it was near death, where it looked like it was dead. And he did that while he was on the cross, and that was to save himself. In fact, the entire act of the crucifixion was to save himself from actual absolute death. There were many beings that were after him. There were three important groups that were after him. One was Caiaphas, and of the head of the Sanhedrin at the time, was definitely after Yeshua. He wanted him dead. He couldn't stand his teachings. He thought that they would bring down the rule of law, and he was quite fervent about that. The other was Herod. Herod would have easily seen Yeshua's head chopped off. And the third was a being that we do not see in the Bible at all, but he was a Roman commander called Oranos, and or Oranos. I'm not sure which way it's actually pronounced, but Oranos was a Roman commander who had a personal vendetta against Yeshua and would come to the family compound where Yeshua lived, just over and over and over. And in the book, several of the things that Oranos did to Yeshua during those years is outlined in the book. For example, one time Yeshua sent a note off to his cousin John the Baptist, who was in prison at the time, and he wanted to ask John the Baptist, is there anything you'd like me to do for you while you're in this state? Anything, business you'd like me to handle, or anyone you'd like me to talk to? And before that note got to John the Baptist, Oranos cut off the hand of the messenger that was taking the note to him, killed him, and brought the hand and the note back to Yeshua, screaming at him about, what is this note all about? What are you actually trying to do here? And threw the hand at Yeshua's chest. So, Oranos was a really nasty guy, and he was not adverse to causing real, evil to be done. Those three beings, Caiaphas, Herod, and Oranos, all wanted Yeshua to be dead, and Yeshua's estimation was that if I don't do something to keep myself from dying outright, I will be dead within a few months. So he orchestrated, with the help of the Creator, everything that came down over Passover that year.
See, the way that I was looking at it when I wrote my last chapter of my book, I realized that he made a decision to do what he wanted to do on his terms. And
yes,
so now we're seeing, when I kept looking at the Gospels and I kept understanding Jesus, everything seemed to be based off of what Jesus wanted done and what his terms were. So he always kept pushing and doing things based off of the fact that he was going to be in charge and he wasn't going to allow himself to be taken over by somebody by happen chance. So
yes, you were absolutely correct there. Absolute.
Okay. Yeah. So I have never heard of Oranos. So he must have. I mean, this is very different than what you hear about with like the Roman centurion in the New Testament, where he's asking, I think it was the centurion asked Jesus if he would save his daughter or friend from sickness or death, and Jesus was able to do it remotely. But, here's another person in here that just must have been actually quite vicious and mean. And when I was doing my research into the Romans, there was a real nastiness to them. And Pilate was no angel either. So I think the New Testament Gospels were sanitized from Roman, kind of the Roman viciousness.
Well, I think in a lot of ways it was. However, even Yeshua said to me, and I think it's in the book, that aside from Oranos and a few other individuals, Rome itself was not against Yeshua. In fact, they held him actually in quite high regard. You see, the Roman spirituality was very, very different than the Jews, of course, at the time, and they had a real strong affinity for healers. They believed in healers, and Pilate saw Yeshua as a healer. Pilate didn't want to put Yeshua through the crucifixion. Yeshua pushed it. Yeshua made it happen because Pilate said, I have nothing against you. You've done nothing wrong. I don't want to do this. Let me go have my breakfast. And Yeshua said, no, I got to do what I got to do, and you got to do what you got to do. And made it happen through the strength of his will. As you gleaned very rightly, David, Yeshua's will was strong, the strongest will of any person at that time.
I think anybody, I mean, the way that I looked at it, it was anybody who was interested in doing something that Jesus was attempting to do would have to have a very large ego, and he would have a very strong sense of determination. So that kind of helped me understand his personality. You know, he just knew that he can do it, and he did it. And no was not an answer for him. So, and then part of the ministry was more of like a show and tell. He was showing people what to do and how to do it, as well as speaking, right, and telling stories.
Yes, definitely, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about. Go ahead.
No,
I was
going
to say, you know, maybe you can fill in a little bit more of the blanks when it comes to his time abroad and what kind of led him up to leaving his home. So again, in my book, I realized that he left home. Based off of his sayings, I was able to determine some of the influences of those sayings, and I kept coming up against and kept noticing a lot of influence from the East. So I saw Confucianism, I saw Taoism, I saw Hinduism, and I saw Buddhism, and I think that his ministry was a Buddhist practice of letting go of the ego and non-attachment, and as he became less, the Father became more, and I felt that was a very Buddhist kind of idea. So I understood, based off of just looking at those influences, that he had to have spent time in the East. And in your book, you spend a lot. I mean, you spent like almost half of the book of what those years were like for him. So maybe you can go through and talk a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah. Excuse me. What caused Yeshua to go to the East is kind of interesting. He wanted to go to school, of course. He was very into, learning. One of the, metaphors he said is, I took to knowledge like sand takes to water. He just had high intellect, very, very smart guy, very, very interested in learning everything that he could learn about the world and how the world worked. Now, of course, he studied Torah, but he also studied something that's also not in our history books, but he says that his family's tradition was to also study some older texts that were the old bone religion. Now, I've said some people have read this in the book and gotten all up in my face because bone wasn't established here in the West as a religion until it tried to become a part of the Buddhist religion in the 1800s. But in fact, bone as a religion began as a pagan religion several thousand years ago, and it's that religion which became part of the Buddhist tradition eventually was taught along with Torah in Jesus' tradition, in Joseph's tradition. So Yeshua had already learned some of this thing, and they got a letter from some people in Kapilya-Vashtu. And if anybody knows what Kapilya-Vashtu is, that is the town where Gautama Buddha was born and raised. And so there was a university there, and they got a letter. Joseph got a letter that said, we'd really like for your son to come and study with us, because they were watching him, they'd heard of him, they knew that he was coming, they'd been waiting for him to become old enough, and Yeshua was just like, yeah, university with, reams of knowledge, let me go. But he had to finish getting ready for rabbinical before he could go. So by the time he was 14, he'd finished his rabbinical, and he was going to be a rabbi, but the temple priest said, you can't be a rabbi until you're a little older. You're a little young to actually take up a post. So he said, great, I'm going off to university. So when he was 14, Joseph walked him down to Aqaba, where he got on a ferry, took him to the Red Sea, took a boat down to Aden, and took a boat then to Krakola, which is now part of Pakistan, and from there walked to Nepal, what's now part of Nepal, and Kapilavastu, where the university was. He lived there for a couple of years, surpassing all the other students, of course, because of his high intellect, and became a teacher there for a little while. And after a little while, it's like it just wasn't enough for him. He knew that there was more for him to do, and it wasn't to stay the rest of his life as being a teacher at this university. So he went off on a journey. And according to Yeshua, that journey started with the most magical and wonderful event. The head of the university took Yeshua aside and said, look, I know who you are. I know what you're here to do, and I know that you're not supposed to be here forever. So here's something I've been holding on to for like 50 years. It was a letter written by Gautama Buddha and left with the university for 500 years. That text, it was actually a map, and he gave it to Yeshua, and Yeshua used that map to go to find a place called the Temple of Man. At the Temple of Man is where he first began to learn how to truly manipulate our world. I mean, if he wanted to turn water into wine, that's how he learned. That's where he learned it. He learned how to use the raw resources of our world and manipulate them in any way that he wanted to. When he was finally done there... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and that was at the Temple of Man.
The Temple of Man is what he called it. Yes.
Was that a whole nother set of people and scholars and devotees and gurus there?
Yes, it was a whole group of people that lived there. Yeah. And he just learned a lot. He had a personal teacher there called Manwa, and Manwa taught him everything until Yeshua had an Ascension event. See, Yeshua had actually 3 Ascension events in his lifetime. I write about 2 of them in the book. One we left out because it's just like one of the others, and redundancy. The book's long enough. But this was the first Ascension event was at the Temple of Man, and he had, surpassed this world. He completely, he went to a place where he met the Creator face to face, and the Creator said, look, you have become the complete embodiment of love. That's all. I mean, that's it. If you want to move on now and leave the earth plane, you're absolutely welcome. Whatever you want to do. What do you want to do? And Yeshua just loved the people of the earth so much he wanted to help people get out of the mire of subjugation of mind that we're all under here on this earth plane. And he said, no, I want to go back. I want to go back, and I want to be a person that can bring this knowledge and help people. And so Creator allowed him to come back here, and that's when he said, okay, I have honed my mind, I've honed my spirit, but I haven't honed my body. So he went and found a martial temple high in the mountains of Tibet, what is now Tibet, and he learned yoga and martial arts and all of the ways that you defend yourself and keep yourself from heat and cold and all of that stuff. He learned all of those things and tempered his body. But as we all know, there is no road on this earth plane that isn't fraught with difficulty. And Yeshua certainly had as much difficulty as anybody. And after he came out of that temple and became an adept and began to wander through the world, helping people, he became disillusioned by the murders and rapes and betrayals and all of the things that he saw going on here. And it completely brought him down and out. And he fell over. He fell down. He was robbed one day, hit in the head. He was laying in the mud, and he said if someone hadn't come around to help him, he would have just laid there and died. He was so disillusioned. But what happened was another adept came and picked him up and, fortunately or unfortunately, gave him an opium pipe, which helped him get up out of the mud and feel better about at least continuing. But he became addicted to the substance. Now, one of the things that happened when he became addicted to that substance, I mean, there's a lot of things in the book, and there's, one very awful thing that happened to him during that time. But once he eventually came back to his homeland, that was at the behest of his brother because his father was dying, Joseph was dying. When he came back, he finally got over his addiction to that. And one of the things one of his mentors said to him was, that was not a mistake. You fell down into the darkest part of your being that you could possibly fall into, so that now and forever you will never wonder what it would be like if you couldn't be in the light, because you will know what that darkness is like, and you will stay in the light. And that was what happened to him. Of course, when he came out of that addiction, he was his full self. He was enlightened. People could see the light of his body when he walked around. They could see the light. That was when his, what you would call, his ministry began.
When I was, again, the way I was approaching Jesus is I was looking at his sayings. And from his sayings, I went, okay, what kind of experiences would this person need to have for him to be able to say the things that he said and do the things that he did? And so he had an open mind. I realized right off the bat, he had an open mind. He had an open heart. He knew how to master the body. He did not embrace fear, so he was fearless, and he knew how to perform miracles. And I thought, what would you need to do to be able to have all five of those things in your life? And I figured that he had to have had some very profound experiences, and several of them. I mean, what you just said about him having to kind of go into the depths of hell, I realized that he had to do something like that. Just really get down deep into that and get disillusioned, which is why I kind of think the Christians kind of adopt this idea of I was lost and you were found. That seemed to be a resident theme in the New Testament, is that there was something about the man has fallen, man is gone, man has lost kind of a sense of where they are and who he is. And Jesus, I felt like he had to experience that as well. The other one that I realized is that the profound experience that he had to have on a mystical side was he had to experience something on the other, something on the other side. And so I felt that maybe the closest thing that he probably could have had, and I tried to analyze this, and how do you fit all these different pieces to this experience that he would have? And that experience, I said, it's not enlightenment, because that's just about the mind. There's something about the heart, and there's something about fearlessness. And I thought maybe that had to do with a near-death experience. And then if you have a near-death experience, why would he come back knowing something about what he referred to as the Father? And I said, so in that near-death experience, he had to have experienced the Father. And so that was how I arrived at my conclusion. And here he's telling you, so I'm not saying that mine is right, but based off of what you're saying, I got things very, very close.
Absolutely, David. I mean,
what you did as well.
It's the thing that astounded me the most. When you and I were first on a radio program, we were both being interviewed at the same time. And we were both talking about this being Yeshua and everything from your book, which I've since read, and you've read my book. We were saying the same things about this person, come from two different directions, but it was clear to me that you have a strong handle on this man, who he is. And I got to say who he is, because he's still here. He's still around. There's no was to it with Yeshua. He's still here.
Maybe you would like to share some of what you mean by that.
Well, what do I mean by that? He's still living. According to Yeshua, he still considers himself to be in the same lifetime. He's not died. When he went from his near lifeless body in the sepulcher to the light body, for lack of a better term, that he has now, that shift, that was not a death experience. So he hasn't gone through the afterlife, and he's not sitting there with, all of the other people who have moved through death. He's in a different place. He is still here with us. He's over 2,000 years old, and he's absolutely active. He says at any particular time there's a 0.5 to 1 billion instances, for lack of a better term, of himself here on the planet doing work at the same time. And that's something that he has learned how to do over the years. There's many things he's learned to do over these 2,000 years that he didn't have the ability to do when he was in an absolute physical body. But he's not gone through death. He's still alive. He's still here. It's one of the things that astounds me and excites me so much, because he can do all of the things that we can do and so much, much, much more. He's not constrained by being in some different dimension that has difficulty interacting with us. He's right here. And you hear stories over the years of people who have seen Jesus. Well, yeah, you have. And he comes to people, and there have been many times in my lifetime where I've not only seen him, but seen him look like he was in the flesh, walking or talking. And those experiences are golden for me, and probably mundane for him. But he's here, and he is available to have a relationship with absolutely anyone. He doesn't care if you have a religion. If you do have a religion, what that religion is does not matter to him one bit. You're human, and if you're human, he's here for you if you want the aid of his presence, that presence of love. He said if you accept him into your heart, he will show you what it means to be loved beyond measure.
I would like to just say that when I was 21, I had 3 very profound experiences of Jesus, and one of them lasted for 8 minutes. So like you, I was walking home from the beach like 11 o'clock one night, and he was there across the street, and he came over to me. Actually, I was walking up the hill, and I crested to the top of the hill, and I saw him across the street and down the way a little bit, and he stared at me, and I stared at him, and he turned around, and we started to walk away, and I said, "Hey, don't leave me. Come back." And with that, he turned around, and he came over to me, and he hugged me, and then with that, we walked together several blocks. And the whole experience lasted about, I timed it, not long ago, a couple of years ago, I timed it, and it was about 7 or 8 minutes. Yeah, so we were walking silently for 8 minutes.
How beautiful.
So
what a joy.
So I know what it means, when he appears. And it was a very profound experience for me. In fact, it kind of in a sense, it really turned my life around. And I found myself, digging deep into Christianity. And I think, had it not been for that experience plus 2 other ones, I probably would never have written a book or been interested in Christianity, but it was because of those experiences that I really kind of delved into the Christian religion, and I went to church. I would like to, ask you, have you gone to church? Was that part of your upbringing, or is it just something that you never really had to do?
Well, I grew up in a very traditional Italian family. I'm not 100% Italian, but my grandparents were, and the house that I grew up in, there was alla familia. It was just my grandmother spoke Italian when she didn't want the children to know what she was saying, et cetera, et cetera. It was a beautiful family to grow up in that respect. And my father had walked away from the Catholic Church because of an argument that he had with the local diocese. But my grandmother did not. She was very, very Catholic. And my father refused to let me to go into all of the stuff that children do in the Catholic Church, communion and confirmation and all that stuff. And I didn't go to Catholic school, but she would take me to the Catholic Church just to give me that sense of the spiritual, if you will. She taught me how to meditate, which in the old world Catholics, that's what prayer was. It was meditation. It wasn't a beseeching of God. It was a meditation. She taught me how to meditate. And I went often with her because I lived in San Luis Obispo, California, which is where one of the original Father Junipero missions are. And that was the church of my family, that mission. And it was a beautiful, wonderful place to feel the spirit of God around you. And so I had that experience, and my sister had become Lutheran, and she made me go to Sunday school when I came and visited her in the summer. But other than that, I never had a religion. I'm not of a religion now. When Yeshua came to me, it wasn't because I besieged him or believed him to be there for me. He just walked into my life. And I am so very blessed and grateful for it. I knew who he was after a few visits. I was about 5 when I first met him. 4 or 5. It was in the new house, so it was 5. I was around 5. And after a few, he told me his name was Yeshua, and I didn't understand the word Yeshua. It wasn't part of my little 5-year-old language. I called him Joshua. But then after a year or so, I said, "Are you Jesus?" And he said, "Yes, that's what a lot of people call me." And I said, "Oh my God, you're Jesus." He says, "Yeah, but I'm just your friend. Don't worry about it." And that was that. He was my Joshua for years, for the rest of my life. Yeah.
And he's been with you ever since.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, there were a couple of years where I ignored him. We get to be weird sometimes in our 20s and 30s. We're trying to figure out the world, and we can get kind of egotistical. So there were a few times when I let him go, but not for long, because his presence is just too wonderful.
Well, a little bit like you, when he came to me, that was just, I was in a position where I was concerned about a lot of things, and I was confused, and there was a lot of uncertainty. And you're a young man trying to find your way in the world, and I just was not able to do it. So this really kind of grounded me, and it gave me a sense of direction, and it gave me a sense of purpose. And I just, a little bit like Jesus, I got really excited about learning and just reading and just absorbing everything. And I ended up going to church. I ended up learning about the Christian mystics and just finding this material just so rich and exciting. And then, like you, it just started to kind of peter out and kind of wither away, and it wasn't very strong and powerful anymore, but there was always something there. And I ended up looking into other facets of Christianity. Like I looked into the Gnostics, and then I started to try to understand the historical development of Christianity. And from there, I started to really try to understand the other religions in the world and get a bigger understanding of, this whole thing people call religion. And religion is actually a quite beautiful word. There are two words about it. There's lig, which is our word for ligament, which means attachment, and re is to redo. So it's like reattaching ourselves to the divine. So I just find that that's very fascinating. And human beings are, we have a sense that there's something beyond death, and there's something beyond this life, and there's like a veil between our reality and what we experience and the other reality. And we just, some of us are wondering what that is and how we get beyond that. So do we have to die before we experience that, or is something else happening? And here you're talking about how other things can come to you. And of course, now in the book that you write, Jesus had, he had a direct experience of the Creator, as you said.
Yes. He asked several, in fact, over the years. Yeah, he had a very, very tight relationship with Creator, which is what he calls God. He calls God Creator, and he says Creator is not human. Creator doesn't have a human form. So we anthropomorphize the Creator if we have an interaction with Creator so that we can use our normal means of communication with Creator. Because otherwise, Creator doesn't have the kind of form that we can communicate with. So we anthropomorphize a Creator in one way or another. And the way that he anthropomorphized a Creator was as a woman who looked like his mother. I thought that was adorable.
That's just amazing. So instead of using the Father, I kind of think of him as personifying God as Father, and you're saying that he kind of flipped the table on that and looked at it as Mother. Is there a reason why he chose Father then?
Creator actually chose his mother's to make him feel comfortable, because he was so comfortable with his mother. He loved his mother so much. When Creator said, does this form help you better? And he says, yes, this is a very familiar form. So that's the form that Creator was for him the rest of his life. He looked like his mother. And, Yeshua is very clear about Creator. Creator's not human. Creator doesn't have a human form. It's not male or female. You try and say he, she, you got half the story in either case.
Yeah.
Creator's the full spectrum.
Right. And that's the unfortunate thing about, personalizing it that way. As you said, you get half the picture.
Yeah. And I think that in the Bible, the man, the male persona was the one that got adopted because it fit right in with the patriarchal church at the time.
Right. There's a whole level of development of what happens when Christianity, or when the Christians end up moving into the Roman Empire and what they had to do. So, there's definitely something different about the Jerusalem church and Jesus' brother James versus what Paul was doing. And maybe we can talk about that. But before we do that, I would like to ask you, with all of these types of experiences that you had at 5 and then with your grandparents, and then you decided that you probably didn't feel like you needed to go to church, or it just wasn't necessary, or was it, it's just like, or were you trying to be happy or make your grandmother happy at all?
No, I liked visiting the church and meditating with her. I like that very much, and I always have a not a weakness, but a place in my heart for the institutions, the buildings where people come to worship, because that energy hangs around, and the feeling in these old churches is just absolutely beautiful, and I love that. But here's what happened one Sunday when I was in Sunday school. I think I was 8. And I'm sitting there in Sunday school, and I'm not in a religion, and I don't know any of these teachings, and I've never read the Bible. And I'm sitting there, and the teacher of the Sunday school started saying, "You are the reason that Jesus died. You are the reason that he is dead. He is dead only because of the things that you have done that he has taken away from you." I mean, it was just like I couldn't believe what this person was saying. It was just, and I stood up in the back of the classroom and I said, "I'm no murderer, and you're not going to pin that on me." And, well, I wasn't welcome back to Sunday school anymore. I didn't have, I didn't have the sensibilities that would make me amenable to religion. I'll put it that way.
That's just so funny. It's just like, because you know the truth, and that's not it. And so you're standing up and speaking up for it. You know, I had a very similar experience. I didn't have like what you had, but I was going to an Episcopal church. Our parents were Episcopalians, and there was
David?
8 years old. Yes.
There you are. Okay,
Can
go
you
ahead.
hear me? Yeah.
I can hear you now.
Oh, and I said, okay. So you know, my parents were Episcopalians, and so there was an Episcopalian church in our neighborhood. And so I'd go there, and I would put my hand on the rocks or the stones, you know, that made the church. And I was just going, God, these stones are like dead. And I feel like this whole religion is dead. What's up with this, you know? That's how I felt at a very early age, that there wasn't anything that was of life in that. And so it wasn't until I had the experience of Jesus that there was something new that was infused into my spirit that kind of started to soar and come alive. And you obviously had you said, hey, wait a minute, that's not, for me. And I had the same kind of a thing. So something else happened.
Yes. Yeah,
it's very fascinating to hear your story and to hear mine. I like compare notes. I like doing that. So,
I know, me too.
It's kind of fun, that you have there's this kind of a tribe out there, and you're going, hey, I'm not seeing it the same way theologically, but I'm sure experiencing something very different that I just feel just as alive with.
Yeah.
Do you, kind of switching a little bit of the subject here, but do you feel that Jesus was destined to do his ministry? And actually, why do you think, and what was his rationale for conducting his ministry essentially in his hometown, in that area, as opposed to somewhere else? So was he destined, and do you feel like why he did it there?
Well, that two things, right? Let's take them one at a time. Was he destined? Yeah. Absolutely. His family were Essene. Joseph was Essene, and a splinter group, if you will, of the Essenes called the Nazarene. Now, this is, again, different from the Bible. That word is used in the Bible, but as far as I'm concerned, it's used in a corrupted manner. Yeshua says the Nazarenes were a group of beings who came to the west, which would be Palestine area, Judah, and from the east originally, and brought the bone with them and melded into the Jewish people at that time, believing that they were the people who were going to bring the great teacher back. See, in the bone religion, the great teacher came to this world about 37,000 years ago. That was about 35,000 years ago when Yeshua was learning about it. And the great teacher gave a whole lot of information to people, which started the bone religion to begin with, and actually a lot of his teachings were then codified into the Vedic texts, which became part of the Hindu religion. So it's all connected. And so those people had been living in Judah for a very long time, waiting for the time of the great teacher to be reborn. And they believed this to be the time, and they believed the being that was going to be born of Mary's womb was going to be the great teacher. So he was raised from childhood to believe, or to at least have the understanding that being a teacher was his life's journey, and being a great teacher, being a very specific type of teacher, a prophet. And so that's how he lived his life. Although he says in his early life he threw that away. He said, nah, come on, that's fanciful thinking. I'm just this guy who just got to learn everything. But it came back to him later on when he starts having these Ascension events and all of that. He realizes, yes, this really is who I am. And the reason he came back to his homeland, he wasn't necessarily going to leave the East when he did, but he got this letter from James saying, you know, Joseph is near death. You need to come back and become the head of the family. It's your position. It's time for you to come home. And he said he had to honor James' request because that was the truth of it. He had to come home and take his place. And so he knew at that time that whatever his mission was going to be, whatever he was going to do, it had to take place in his homeland. That's something he just knew.
Well, okay, so let me just ask and kind of go back just a little bit, but you mentioned the bone religion. And is that bone as in B-O-N-E, or how do you spell that?
It's B-O-N, bone.
Oh, B-O-N,
and
bone.
Yeah. And if you look up bone on the Internet, you're going to learn that the bone religion now is a more modern religion, and it's become an official part of the Buddhist religion. It's a splinter sect of the Buddhist religion. But we're talking about the bone that's been around for, 15, 16, 17,000 years. The older, more animistic type religion.
So can you explain a little bit about it and, what it is?
I honestly don't know that much about it. Yeshua didn't feel as though it was important for me to really understand the old bone, only to know that it was a part of the teachings that were given to him when he was a child. So they're going to be more Eastern. They're going to be more Buddhist-like in the way that they talk to the world, but they're also a little more mystical and a little more magical than the Jewish religion. So he believed that it was possible for the world to shift to your will and all that kind of stuff.
You mentioned that it had an animistic kind of tendency to it. So when you kind of go into the Jewish religion, there's a very strong moral component to it. So, and the teachings on how you conduct your life and how you live your life and how here are the rituals that you engage in, and these are the types of food that you eat. So it's all very regulated in many regards, and then there's a very strong moral principle, and there's a very ethical kind of side to them. But this would be something very different. When you start getting into the deeper layers of kind of the spirituality, and I wouldn't say just religion, but, like spirituality, there's a creative element that you can start participating with the universe, and you can start listening to nature. You can start hearing voices. You can start seeing angels. There's all of those kind of dynamics that are available. So maybe the bond had something to do with that. And, sometimes teachings aren't just always about, morality. And I think that that's one of the things that Christianity has. They brought with them a very strong moral code, with them, and the mystical side of things have been downplayed quite a bit. So it's kind of got watered down, unfortunately. At least that's how I see it.
I do too. I think you hit on something very important there, David. It's that, well, backing up a little bit, one of the things I've learned about the Jewish religion from Yeshua is that, yeah, there is a very strong code about how you are to act in the world, how you're to interact with other people, how you're to treat people, but it has no, except for believing in God at some level, they don't dictate what you believe. The Jewish religion doesn't dictate what you believe. You can believe in reincarnation, you can believe in angels, you can believe in heaven and hell, or you can believe in none of the above. They don't care. It's how you act in the world, how you be in civilization. That's what the Jewish religion really is about in its purest form. The thing about Christianity is that it's almost just the opposite. Whatever you do, we can find a way to forgive it, but you better believe this. It's almost the opposite, yeah. and yeah. I find that to be very interesting.
It's in fact, they said if you don't believe exactly like this, you're going to go to hell, which is a really weird. As far as I'm concerned, it's very strange that your belief has to be so pure and it has to be so convicted on this one issue, whether he died for your sins or not. And if you don't believe that and accept that as, God's gift to mankind, that he died for you, then...
Right. Yeah. David, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I guess are we kind of breaking up here?
Yeah, you broke up a little bit. The last thing I heard was, if you don't believe that he died for you.
Yes, if you don't believe that he died for you, then you have a one-way ticket to hell. I just find that that's very short-sighted and very limiting.
I agree. Now, when we start talking about the animistic and more pagan ideas that Bon may have brought into Yeshua's life at a very early age, it also set him up for falling in love with the person he married, Miriam, who is Mary Magdalene in our vernacular now. His wife, Miriam, she was Egyptian. And then this goes against a lot of what people out there talking about Mary Magdalene now are going to say. So sorry, people, but this is what Yeshua has told me. Mary Magdalene was Egyptian by birth, and she was a high pagan priest in an Egyptian temple there on the Sea of Galilee. And he met her in that respect, in that that's who she was when he met her. And it took him a couple of years to convince her to leave her priestess position and marry him. They fell in love, but she didn't want to give up her place of power in her religion to marry him. She didn't feel like it was important, but he was a rabbi. Rabbis had to get married to someone, and he wanted to marry her, so he kept pressing, and eventually she gave in and married him.
Wow, this is a very interesting point because, again, one of the things that I noticed when I was reading the New Testament Gospels, again, it was like what's there and what's not there. And the other thing that I started to notice is that in Christianity and in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we're going to start seeing a lot of dismissing or trashing people it's the tribe that you're in doesn't like this other person, then they're going to minimize you, or they're going to just be very vicious and nasty, and they're going to call you all kinds of horrible names. And I look at what happened to Mary Magdalene, and there's one, she's kind of been marginalized, and two, she's been kind of dismissed, and three, she was referred to as a prostitute. And I thought, boy, this seems very consistent with the way people were presenting other people and who they were in relationship to the group that they were in, like the Essenes or the Christians. And so I just felt like there was something more about Mary because she was so denigrated at that point. So
they had to get rid of her.
Something,
yeah.
So, and
Sorry,
I think
they
had to get rid of her. Again, I think they had to get rid of her for a variety of reasons, and one of them is I think that she just had the same intellect as Jesus. And the fisherman mentality is not one of great depth. It might be one of great passion, but there's a certain depth to Jesus' understanding about the divine, and I could only assume that Mary had the same type of personality, a very strong personality with a very strong mind and with a great deal of insight and wisdom.
Yes, absolutely. And personal power. She was a very powerful person. She commanded a room if she wanted to, and she was a teacher in her own right. And she taught right alongside Yeshua. Once they got married and she came back to the family compound, she taught classes to the women, and Yeshua taught classes mostly to the men. And again, that was a Jewish thing, right? Women and men were a little bit separated. So they taught, but they taught. What was that?
I said it wasn't just a little bit.
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't just a little bit. Yeah. So they both taught classes, as James taught classes too. They were the top teachers. The three of them were the top of the heap, if you will, in what became what some people are calling now the Church of Jesus and James. And when you brought that up a little earlier, that James was powerful person.
Yeah. And he was also considered the father of the Jerusalem church.
Yes, he was, right. Which, in James' terms, was the continuation of his brother's teachings. And he tried very, very diligently. James tried to bring the teachings of Yeshua back into the Jewish religion, and the fathers at that time weren't going to have it, weren't going to let it happen. So didn't make it. But then, of course, Paul came along, and John went off on his due diligence, on his ministry. Andrew went off on his ministry. All these beings and others that aren't mentioned in the book at all. Many, many beings from the schools that had become enmeshed in the teachings. Really, really got into them with James, and then went off to other parts of the world to teach. As we know about a few of them, but there were lots of them. There wasn't just 12. Yeshua was teaching a couple hundred people, and many of them went off on ministries all around the world.
Well, I don't know where it was, whether it was Luke. I think it was Luke, where Jesus had essentially 70 disciples. So somewhere along the line, there was this paring down of just the 12. But, the New Testament Gospels mention that Jesus had 70. So I would imagine that there's a layer of intimacy that he had with almost everybody. So it wasn't just, I'm your teacher and then go out in the world. I think that there was also a very hands-on approach that Jesus had in mentorship with a lot of people. So it wouldn't surprise me that it was more than 12.
Yeah, I believe that you're right in that. Although he does make it very, very clear that the two disciples, if you will, he called them devotees, that touched his heart the most, that became like personal friends, were Judas and Peter.
So why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about what was Judas like and what was Peter like, and why they became personal friends. I would like, before I do that, there was one question when I was looking at the book. I was thinking, does Jesus have any friends before he started his ministry? And because it seems like maybe he developed friendships while he was ministering, but did he have any friends before he started to minister? And then I started to ask, well, if he did, how would that have affected his ministry? So maybe he wanted to separate any of the past experiences that he had with men and women that he might have grown up with. What's your take?
Interesting question. Of course, he had friends throughout his lifetime, and he left many friends behind in all of the different areas that he lived and left. But in his homeland, this is, again, something completely against the mythology that's grown up around Jesus. And it's not everything that people believe about Jesus has come directly from the Bible. You know that, David. Some of it is just, it's what's been handed down about him. And Jesus was not a pauper. His family were not paupers. His father, it said he was a carpenter, but really he was a contractor. And he managed crews of men who put up buildings, and it's what we would consider a modern-day contractor did. That's what Joseph did. And when there were a number of beings in this group, the Essene, the Nazarenes in the Essene, who wanted to support Jesus' birth and growing up so that he could have the best beginning to this life of the great teacher returning. And they gave, when they put Mary and Joseph together, they gave them a large area of land on a hill outside of Mount Tabor, about 5 miles from Sepphoris, the city that grew up as Sepphoris, Herod's, glittering jewel of commerce in Upper Galilee.
Right.
Yeah, so they had land, and there were lots and lots of like-minded Nazarene people who were friends of Jesus, who gave him love, and he loved them, and they had family gatherings and parties, and it was a rich, rich community. But there were none within the community save his brother James, who really came along as someone very important to him prior to the influx of the devotees and coming in of Peter and Judas and all of the others. There were people he loved dearly, but they weren't part of his ministry. They were part of his family, basically.
When I was able, when I put all of Jesus' sayings, and then I categorized them based off of subject. And so the number one subject that Jesus talked about was money. And then when I broke that down into subcategories, I noticed that there was the merchant mentality, there was an entrepreneurial mentality, there was the mentality of person who owned like a land and sold crops from, not necessarily farmers, but maybe they were ranchers, but they had some type of agricultural product that they were selling. And then I noticed, the nature of inheritance and then working with your hands. And so all of these things came together to me, and it made me ask the question, how would he know about this unless he was already involved with it?
Yes.
So that's how I came to the conclusion that Jesus came from, a fairly wealthy family. Of course, in Luke, it says that the women, there were certain women that traveled with him, and they were referred to as women of means, which means that they were wealthy women. And Jesus' mother, Mary, was considered one of those women, as was Mary Magdalene. So do you think that she came from money?
Mary Magdalene,
she did.
Miriam had money in her own right. In fact, she was wealthier than Yeshua, than Jesus. She had amassed quite a lot of resources by the time she met Jesus, which would have been normal for the head priestess of temple, Egyptian temple at that time. This was her proper place. So she had houses. She had a house in Magdala. She had a house in Tiberias, and she had a house in Caesarea.
Wow.
That was land that she owned, and she had a lot of monetary resources and fields and, people that worked under her, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So when she came to marry Yeshua, she didn't necessarily bring all of that with her. She sort of left it as community property between her and Yeshua, and they did use those resources from time to time, but she didn't really feel that they were important in that respect. So what was important for her was melding into the family, melding into the compound, becoming a rich resource herself rather than the things in her life.
Uh-huh. Right.
Yeah.
And, when you think about the ministry had to have some source of money to be able to conduct it. So I think there were people that were donating to, Jesus would do things, and they would give him money, or they'd give him food, or they would do something. But it would still require an element of money to be able to do what Jesus did.
Oh, they had plenty.
So tell me, if she's the temple priestess, and then she decided that it was time to do the ministry with Jesus and be by his side, she had to make a huge sacrifice. And I think Jesus did too. Anybody that goes out on a type of mission like that is making huge sacrifices.
Absolutely. Yeah, both of them. Actually, I think that Miriam sacrificed more than Yeshua did. Because, he still was an owner of property, and he had his brothers. His brother Jude was taking care of the family business. He was a contractor. He took it over from his father, who had taught him how to do it. His brother James was like his manager, if you will, and they were together all the time. Miriam... oh, gosh. Could you ask me your question again? I got a little lost in thought there.
I was just thinking, the nature of the sacrifice to be able to conduct a ministry, and then the sacrifice one would have to, marry Jesus. Now, if she was a priestess, then we're looking at sacrifices being made. My life is about to change in a way. Everybody makes sacrifices, but, all of a sudden you're really giving up a lot for this. She did. Yes. There's more skin in the game. There's a lot more skin in the game.
Yes. What she had to give up was her entire position within the temple. She had to step down as head priestess and walk away from the position that she had trained for her entire life. As she said in one of the things that she wrote to me, is she'd never wanted the jewel of marriage in any crown that she wore. It wasn't what she wanted. She wanted to be the high priestess, but when she fell in love with Yeshua, and that was just overwhelmingly a draw for her as it was for him. They knew their future was together. They knew they were coming at this work together, and the goddess who Miriam talked to, even more than Yeshua talked to Creator, she talked to Goddess, and Goddess told her that while she was with Yeshua, that she would be helping Yeshua set the platform for his work. And when Yeshua left, she would be starting her seminal work in the world, which of course she did. She was in danger, quite a lot of danger after the crucifixion. And she ended up absconding with some of the children and went to Europe and then that's where she started her seminal teaching. She began the Order of the Rose, which years and years later transformed from Miriam's group into what became the Rosicrucians. A lot of the Rosicrucian beliefs came from Miriam directly. She's the one that started that organization, but it changed a lot when it became a more patriarchal organization, as you can imagine. But she gave up everything that she believed she had come to this life for to take on a brand new mission, a brand new undertaking. Now, Yeshua, what he let go of was what can I say? When he married Miriam, as he says in the book, my marriage was not written in the annals of my creed. It could not be. She was a pagan, and it meant that any children they had together would not be Jewish because she was not Jewish. And so what he gave up was a very intimate relationship with his religion of birth.
And part of the teachings that he was ministering and he was teaching and he was, conducting and was in many respects, at least from my perspective, was something very new. So he wasn't taking, I don't even know, I don't, people think the way that I was kind of taught, when I was going to church is that Christianity was just a continuum of the Old Testament. And the more I started investigating Jesus, the more I started realizing that there's a separation here. It's not a continuity. It's a break. It's something very new and very different.
Yes, definitely very different. Yeah. Mhm.
So, let's just kind of go. First, I would like to mention this. There's a personal journey that Jesus went on. And like with all teachers and all men of wisdom, all women of wisdom, one goes through hard knocks and just more hard knocks and just, sometimes you just get wiped out. And what's remarkable that I found in Jesus is the resiliency to say, even though I found, I went through kind of hell and back and I understand just the depth of human depravity, I'm still recognizing who they are and that I am being motivated by love. And that is such an enormous realization to come to, as opposed to just being defeated by the whole situation and just saying, I give up, mankind's horrible and I want to leave, and you just get bitter and angry and disappointed, and then that becomes your life. And for Jesus, there seems to have been something else that took place for him to say, no, that isn't it. I need to do something more. And that's a remarkable thing. So, when real authentic teachers come around, you kind of sense it and know it because they've been through hell and back in a sense.
Yes, absolutely. And anyone that thinks that Yeshua could be who he was, teach what he taught, and love us the way he loves us in our core for who we are, no matter what we say or do, believes that that's just coming from a la life, that's nuts.
Yeah.
Not possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's not this flower power child. No.
No.
There's an aggressiveness to this. He's referred to as the Lion of Judah. So there's something to that term there.
That's very interesting. Yes.
So remember he says you have to be gentle as dove and wise as a snake. And when I came across, when I was reading that and I was really thinking about it, I was really deeply contemplating, how do you become really wise like a snake, and how do you become gentle as a dove? I mean, these are very antithetical ideas, and yet he seems to be embodying both. Well, how do you do that? Yeah. So what would you have to do to become both gentle and really, really insightful? Well, you have to have a lot of bad things happen to you to become very insightful.
Yeah.
Because you can't, Jesus wasn't just book smart. That's the difference.
Right.
There's a lot of people out there that are, I read a book and I know what now I have, I've read 10 books and so I really know something. Yeah, Jesus did the same thing, but that wasn't it. There was a whole nother layer to who he was and his personality, and it has a lot to do with experiences, both profound in the bad sense and profound in just like the bliss sense.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And one of the things that people don't realize is that there were people after Yeshua since he was a child. They wanted him dead. This great teacher, ain't going to come into my lifetime. We don't want him around. There were many, many powerful beings as far away as the East and as far north as Europe. There were whole groups of people who wanted him dead. And we go over a couple of those instances where murderers, assassins came after him. One was when he and Joseph went to Egypt when Yeshua was 8 or 9, and someone poisoned him. They wanted him dead, and he came through that. And my understanding is that there were several times in his lifetime where assassins had to be thwarted because they were coming after him. When he was in the East, he had some assassins follow him from the Red Sea all the way to Kapilavastu, and almost had their way with him twice on that journey. So even though he fell down into those dark places that we talked about earlier and had those experiences, he already was wise enough about the world to realize that there could be dangers around every corner. No matter how much love, no matter how much wonderful things might be, in one respect, people can be quite evil.
Yes. Was there something that he was saying, like there's all these people coming out from the woodwork, so to speak, from the East and from the North, and they were attempting to assassinate Jesus. How would they know that the great teacher is coming into the world?
Oh, a lot of people knew it. It was known across many lands. The people in the East at Kapilavastu, there were whole groups of people in the East that were waiting for him to come and had been watching, knew that he was going to come into the Middle East. There were groups in northern Europe that were waiting for it. There were groups in Africa that were waiting for it, and they were all watching. And so when in the Bible they talk about the wise men who came from the star, that's actually, as far as I'm concerned, a metaphor, not an actual reality of 3 men who walked into the manger. There was no manger, by the way, but it was a metaphor for all the people who were watching and waiting for this person to be born. Some because they wanted to help him do what he was come to do, and some because they wanted to hinder.
Yeah, in the New Testament, you have the 3 wise men, and so they're the ones that came to help, and provide the wealth that was necessary for Jesus to do the work. I mean, it's a beautiful story. So obviously there was something in the sky. There's something in the sky that seemed to trigger, the events that unfolded. So let me just ask you, what is it that you think Jesus was attempting to accomplish, and what was his teachings, and why would all these other groups of people from all over the world say, we need this guy dead? We don't want that. We don't, whatever he has to offer, we don't want.
He came to take the chains off of our lives, take the chains off our beings. Let's talk about today, because I think we can talk about it easier if we talk about it in terms of what's happening at present. There are entire forces on this planet, some terrestrial, some extra-dimensional, some non-terrestrial. There are all kinds of forces on this planet who don't want us to become awake. They don't want humanity to move away from the chains of subjugation that we're now in. As a subjugated race of people, humanity feeds resources to these other groups at an astounding rate. Resources that we don't get to use ourselves. And these resources are what they want to continue. But if we become awake and we stop being subjugated by these fear thoughts, fear is the big deal. Fear is the opposite of love. And divine love will get rid of fear. Fear will get rid of divine love. They are equal forces. And so these other groups, they use fear to subjugate us, to keep us thinking and believing things that just aren't true about who we are, where we came from, what we're to do here, what is available to us. We can all awaken. We can all be enlightened. We can all ascend if we want to, or allow ourselves to go through death if we want to. It's a much more malleable future that we can have if we wake up. And that's what Yeshua wants to do. He wants to take the subjugation of fear off of our beings and allow us as a race to wake up.
Well said. Yeah, because everything that Jesus did was, he was brave and courageous and fearless, and that he was infused with this sense of mission and determination, and he was just dogged about what it is that he wanted to do, and that had to have affected, his ministry and those around him. They had to have seen it.
Absolutely. Yeah, they did. Absolutely. When you talk about seeing it, now we're going to bring in John the Baptist, right? Because there was the thing at the river, right? The thing that happened at the Jordan River. What?
Yeah, let's talk about John. I said let's talk about John.
Oh, okay. Now, Yeshua actually had two seminal moments with John the Baptist, and people don't know about the first one. But when Yeshua came back to the Judah and went to the family compound, and James and Jude were just on him like they kicked him out, let's put it that way, because he was still addicted to opium when he got back to Judah the first time. He hadn't been able to get away from that compound, and they judged him harshly, and they kicked him out. And when he was out wandering in Judah, he came upon John, and in an interaction that he had privately with John over a campfire, John inserted a seed in Yeshua that caused Yeshua to finally do what he needed to do to get off of his addiction and move forward with his true self. And then later on, when it was time for him to start wandering and doing his ministry, then he went back and found John at the river's edge. And when John baptized Jesus, then everybody saw it. He was illuminated like a light bulb, and just lots of energy and colors, he said, and all kinds of things flying around him at the time. People were quite astounded by what they saw that day. It was quite amazing. But it was that was the second interaction with John.
Yeah, when I was looking at Jesus' life based off of the Gospel, I noticed that Jesus is one thing before he went to John, and then he's something else after he sees John. Mm-hmm. And John was the bridge between one type of life and another type of life. And I tried to explore the concept of what John had to bring to Jesus, and how Jesus might not have necessarily agreed with John's theology, but there was something about John that Jesus needed. And so I explored that in my book. And then from that, Jesus had to go through, I guess, the 40 days and 40 night experience out in the desert. And that was kind of the final purging of Jesus's kind of personality that prepped him for his ministry. Is there anything that you got to experience, or was Jesus talking to you about what happened to him while he was out in the desert for those 40 days?
No. In fact, he said that many times he would run out into Decapolis and spend time in the desert, that was something he did actually often. When he felt overwhelmed and unable to find the germ of his true self, he would run off into the desert. So that was not the only time. I mean, he did that over and over. And so whether that was an actual 40 days that he spent in the desert or not, I can't say. It's more likely it's a metaphor for what actually happened. But it was something that he did often. If he started feeling lost, then he was off into the desert.
Yeah, I noticed that. He said on several occasions it would say that he would go to quiet and lonely places. And I thought, well, what are you doing out there in quiet and lonely places? And this is, again, it's like he's having to rejuvenate in a sense. He's having to refocus.
Yes, that's exactly
he's trying to clear
what it
himself
was.
He's trying to clear himself to get focused and understand, am I on the right path? Or, how come I totally believe that there was a lot going on where Jesus was saying a lot of things and people were like, what, huh? They just weren't getting what he was saying. And so I kind of think that there was a level of frustration that he was experiencing because, he's like the math teacher that's teaching you calculus, but all you're ready for is, basic arithmetic. So, how do you take Jesus to that level and then try to teach something when everybody is down at this this kind of this base experience? I mean, it had to have been extraordinarily challenging for him and maddening and frustrating.
Yeah, yes. I imagine it was. And that's something that I noticed that people don't get as well. Yeshua was a passionate man. He could experience any of the emotions that we experience. The difference between you and me and Yeshua is that he handled himself around those emotions, usually very, very well, and didn't allow the emotions to translate into actions of themselves. And that was something that we have to work very hard to get to that place in our lives where we can overcome our emotions.
Right. And, it's interesting because when I was just analyzing a lot of just what his sayings were. And then I was trying to understand, he would say things and then he would go place. And then he would say things and then he would, go to another place. So there seemed to be this kind of string of pearls that were wisdom, walking, wisdom, walking, wisdom, walking, And with that, I just had, to me it was very fascinating. So I'm just trying to understand, how all this stuff was transpiring and what he was thinking. But there were moments when I started to look at when at the beginning of the ministry, he seemed to be very focused on the teachings, whether it would be, the teaching that you would hear that would be associated with the Sermon on the Mount. And then you'd have his parables. And it seems that as he progressed in the ministry for the several years, that those teachings, he wasn't doing that as often as he was engaging those people who were always against him. And he had a rhetorical style in which he would take somebody's attack and flip it around like a martial artist would in like judo. You just take it, move their energy, and move it into some other direction. So a perfect example is, who here is without sin? Cast the first stone. That was the type of rhetoric that he seems to have used, and so he's kind of mastering his emotions. At that moment. He's probably really angry with what's happening, but he's going to do it in a very constructive way to redirect the energy away from this very destructive act. Yeah, he was also very straightforward. I just love it when I tell a friend of mine, It's like when he'll start complaining to me, and I go, hey, what did Jesus say? Get up and pick up your mat, Start walking.
Yeah, David, one of the things I got to say to you is that, yes, you came at this mission of understanding who Jesus was and what actually happened to him in his lifetime from this very analytical viewpoint and taking the stuff out of the Bible and making, really wonderful deductions from what you read and studied. But also, Jesus was sitting on your shoulder. I mean, how many times did he maybe whisper in your ear? And and you listened,
There was a very interesting experience that I had, and I was writing the chapter on John the Baptist, and I finished writing this whole section, and it was like I took the 40 days, and I just said, well, that was just like a metaphor for a long time, and maybe it was out there for a couple of times, a couple of days or a week or whatnot, but 40 days, I don't think so. So I finished that whole section, and I said, okay, I'm done for the day because I was exhausted after writing it. So I was in the den, and I was just kind of sitting down, and I was just, having a little dinner, and there was a voice inside my head, and it says, you got that all wrong. You have to reconsider 40 days in the desert and what that meant.
There you go.
So yeah, I think that there was this, I feel like there were moments when I wrote, and the next day I would look at my work and I go, I got to do a little editing before I start off in the next section of what it is I want to write, and I would read it and go, I wrote that yesterday, and I don't remember writing any of it. So there was some interesting and very fascinating ideas that were coming through to me and experiences in writing that book. And I miss it, because I haven't had that same kind of determination and focus and just joy of waking up and knowing. And actually I woke up every morning with this feeling inside my gut that was saying, you have to write. You can't. And I had to say, I need a break. No, you can't. You just got to write.
Yeah.
So, we were talking a little bit about Jesus' personal friends, and while he was ministering, that there was Judas and Peter. So I was wondering if maybe you had some insights about Judas and about Peter. And did he know them before he started his ministry, or was it because he conducted his ministry?
Oh, good questions. Let's take Peter first. So Peter was the head of a family. He had a lot of children. He had a wife, grandchildren, the whole thing. And Peter knew Joseph. They were both merchants in the same area of the world. They knew each other. But Peter did not know Jesus. Before the day at Capernaum, apparently, that wasn't the day. Sorry, Peter was already with Yeshua at the family compound, learning from him before the day in Capernaum. So Peter and his son had heard Yeshua talk someplace, and Peter's like, "Wow, this is Joseph's son. Oh man, I got to get some more of this." And he and his son, went off to study at the family compound. And Yeshua said to me that Peter reminded him of Joseph. They were very similar type people, men who were thoughtful, who allowed their love to go in the world, who were also really good merchants and understood business. And so he said Peter often listened to him with a compassionate ear. They would go off for walks, and he would talk to Peter about what was going on with him, and Peter would often listen and, have a wise word to say to him as if he were off with Joseph. So he was good friends with Peter. He really loved him. And he reminded him of Joseph, who he, of course, missed very much. So that was a relationship that he really cherished. And the other one was Judas. Now, that is a very different relationship. He said, of all of the devotees of all of the people that studied with him or listened to him or lived on the family compound, Judas was more like Jesus than any of them. They were both highly intelligent. Yeah. So they were both highly intelligent, highly passionate, wanting to see the world differently, Judas wanted to embrace Yeshua's teachings deeply, and Yeshua had a heart connection with Judas that was very deep, very fast, and they became best friends. And Yeshua says that whenever Judas would leave the compound, because he would frequently, that he missed him terribly and couldn't wait for him to get back. He was a heart friend, a deep heart friend to Jesus. And maybe as close to Jesus or possibly as close to Jesus as James was. They were very, very, very good friends. And so that begs the question, doesn't it? Why did Jesus betray him? Why did Judas betray him? Well, he didn't. He didn't. He actually did exactly what Jesus asked him to do. And that's what people don't understand. Wow. He was cast as a betrayer, but Yeshua asked him to give him over to the Romans. That's what Jesus wanted. And again, when we go back to earlier in our conversation when we were talking about, why the crucifixion? Well, it's something he needed to do. It was his plan.
Right, which is what I said before, is that Jesus was interested in controlling his own destiny.
Absolutely, yes. So Judas, the reason... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and that's why Jesus did what he did, is that he wanted to control as much as he could the outcome of what was going to happen to him, as opposed to it just being willy-nilly happening, right? Just, oh my God, I don't know why that happened.
Exactly,
he got blindsided.
Yeah.
He wasn't, so Jesus didn't want to be blindsided.
Right. So instead of being blindsided, he orchestrated the entire Passover thing that happened, brought his will to bear, forced Pontius Pilate to offer him up to crucifixion, literally forced Pilate to do that. Pilate was very angry when he realized that Yeshua was forcing him to do something he didn't want to do. And he made it happen. He definitely made it happen. And Judas, of course, after the crucifixion, Yeshua said there was nobody but Judas who was strong enough to do what he asked him to do. Because Judas was a militant. He was a zealot. Yeah. And he was used to military operations. And so none of the other people in his entire life would have done for him what Judas did for him.
There's a great sacrifice for Judas, then.
Yes.
I've been thinking about Judas quite a bit. I've been thinking of Judas a lot and trying to understand his personality, and really kind of dig into his motive as to why he would turn on Jesus. And I hadn't thought about Jesus asking him to do it. I mean, it seems as though, the way the New Testament is written is that Jesus was alluding that Judas was going to betray him, and that Judas was kind of like the traitor, and that there was something about that had a stigma to it. And so I kind of imagined that maybe Judas was upset that, all of a sudden, I could imagine that Judas was looking at Jesus, and Jesus saying, and there's someone that's going to betray me, and he's going to be a traitor. And it's like Judas is thinking, why are you looking at me like that?
Yeah, why are you throwing me under the bus now? Actually, he had asked him the week. But he knew it. He asked him the week before. He took him aside when they were outside Jerusalem and told him why, and asked him if he would do that for him. And Judas said, I don't want to do this for you. I don't want to do this, but I can't say no. I love you too much to say no.
Wow. That's just a lot of camaraderie there. Because he knew what the consequences were, and he knew what was going to happen if he did it. Yeah. And so, there's that whole stigma of just he was a traitor, and now he has all of his like reputation that was destroyed, because everybody saw him in a different light.
Yeah, definitely.
That's very
definitely.
Cool.
Yeah, Judas,
Judas
was
a couple.
Beautiful being. Go ahead.
Oh, man, that's very different than that. He was constantly taking money from the treasury, and he was kind of self-centered and all that kind of stuff. So again, here's another person that was betrayed in a very different way than what you're saying. So
yeah, definitely.
Which kind of goes back to what I was saying about earlier, is that there's a smear campaign that's going on, and I noticed that with certain people within the narrative, the gospel narrative, some are being elevated into very high positions, and they're doted upon in a sense, and then there were others that were either dismissed or minimized or marginalized.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. James also being one of them. How many times when I grew up did the Catholic Church doctrine say Jesus didn't have any brothers or sisters? Mary was a virgin in all her life.
Exactly, and that's what I looked at. It's like, if his family was more involved than they were, then how come they're left out of the story, except his mother Mary, who was elevated into the mother of God? I mean, again, there's that whole elevation and dismissal kind of arc that's going on here. So you know what, we're getting close to our 2 hours here, and I have a couple more things that I'd really like to talk to you about. So
sure,
maybe we
let's
shift
do
a little bit. Let's just shift gears a little bit. Okay, so your book is called Journey of a Prophet, and when here I am, I'm reading the Gospels over and over and over again, and the earliest of all the Gospels, Jesus would refer to himself as a prophet, and he would do it it's interesting, he would always do it in a roundabout way. Jesus would never say, I am, I'm this, I'm that. He seems to always just say, well, who do you think I am? And he would say, no prophet is honored in his hometown. So there's kind of a funny way where Jesus is not announcing to the world, hey, everybody, look at me. I'm this, great person. I'm the teacher. I'm the man here, bow down and worship to me. He didn't have that. He had, I think, a personality that was very bold and very aggressive and at the same time very compassionate. But he wasn't I don't think he was so egotistical that he was always saying, hey, look at me, everybody.
No,
so
far
far
from.
To him,
right.
Exactly. See, this is a very interesting point, and I had to think through that. Like, why would Jesus constantly say, when people would come up to him and say, "Hey, are you the Messiah?" And he goes, "Well, who do you think I am?" And he wasn't saying yes, and he wasn't saying no, but he was allowing the other person to really kind of think through what they want and what they need.
Yeah.
So I also think that was a way, and I also think that was his way of bringing people into the fold to say, hey, look, let me show you a few things, and then you can make up your mind. But you used the term prophet, and I used the term that he called himself a prophet. So what do you think about this whole idea that Jesus is referred to as the Son of God? I mean, is there some other way to look at that other than, say, the way the Christians understand it? What's your take on that?
Well,
and let's go into one more thing. And then let's just kind of dovetail that into Christ consciousness. What's that? What do you think that is?
Yeah. Okay.
It's a good thing right here at the end of the interview, but
it's okay. It's okay. It's great. Okay, so there was, there's the trial that happens before the crucifixion, the Sanhedrin Trial, right? And when Yeshua and I wrote about that, and he told me about what happened during that trial, and actually there's a couple other times in the book where this happens too, but I'll point to that moment. They asked him who he is, and they said, are you the Messiah? And he said, I can't be the Messiah. You've already ruled that I'm not the Messiah. Are you telling me that what you ruled is wrong? And they said, but who are you? And he said, well, I am a son of man by learning, and a rabbi by teaching. And so he called himself a son of man, not a son of God. And he makes a very big distinction there. We're all sons and daughters of God. There's nothing special about being of God. We are all divine creatures with a piece of God within us. There's nothing, that's not a distinction, but a son of man is what he learned how to be. And that's he being of service to mankind, to humanity. That's his way of being of service to us, and he learned that when he learned to become at the Temple of Man. He learned how to become a son of man. And so that's his mission, being a son of man. But he has never said to me ever that he's a son of God, except in the way that we all are sons and daughters of God.
The general sense. Yeah, the general sense. We're all sons and daughters, right?
Yes. We all have a piece of the divine in us.
Exactly. And we're all connected to that. Unfortunately,
Absolutely.
There's a lot of other issues there's all these other blockages that prevent us from really kind of understanding what that is. And most of it is all emotional. And, of course, my feeling is that almost everything is emotion. Everything is emotional. If you're bored, that's emotional. If you're joyful, that's emotional. If you're angry, that's emotional. If you're happy, that's emotional. Being human is just pure emotion. You are a vehicle for emotion.
Yes.
So the best you can do is manage your emotions.
Manage your emotions, exactly. Got to do that. And he talks about I just had something in my mind to say, and it eluded me. So let's keep going. It'll probably come back.
Well, okay. So then, aside from the Son of God, and what you thank you for mentioning that, because he also mentions that he's the son of Adam too. So he liked to use those two terms, the Son of Man and Son of Adam. But now we also kind of go into the present day ideas and the New Age ideas of the Christ consciousness. And when people ask me about that, I cringe, because I just think that's my book was, the subtitle is called The Man. So I was really trying to understand what happened to him and what he was attempting to accomplish. So the Christ consciousness wasn't necessarily about.
Oh, David, you went away again.
To address. I'm really trying to understand him. But this idea, the Christ consciousness, keeps coming up. Do you have any, words of wisdom on that?
Well, I first came across this Christ consciousness idea way back in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, when I was doing a lot of studying of different religious texts and different ideas, et cetera, and it never really sat well in me, because it seemed to be a very cerebral concept. And as far as I'm concerned, when you go into your spirit and you wake up and you become, quote unquote, enlightened, which one of my masters has always said to me, you wish to become enlightened? Simply lighten up. So I agree with that. That's what it means, lighten up. So it seemed to me that it was much too cerebral to be real, because when I'm in my spirit and I'm in my spiritual self and I'm humming and life is not bothering me and I'm able to field my emotions without trouble and things are humming along, it's not cerebral, it's heart. It's heart. So Christ consciousness, I don't exactly understand what it is. I never have, and I don't subscribe to it.
And how would you kind of think of that also in terms of the sacred feminine? Or do you have a different idea of, Mary Magdalene, the sacred feminine principle? I'm being asked about that as well. So what's your take on that?
Mary Magdalene does talk about the sacred feminine because she talks about magic a lot. And I am writing a book that's about her concepts, and she talks about magic and making magic. And female magic and male magic are very different. And she talks a little about, the way that women conjure magic, the way that men conjure magic is very, very different. And so what she teaches is how women become their magical selves. And so when you talk about the sacred feminine, it seems to me that it's pretty much the same as talking about the magical feminine, the part of us that is unique to our sex. And we're both men and women are equally magic. It's just that the magic is different and it's conjured differently. There's a sacred in that. I think there's a sacred masculine as well. Sorry to interrupt him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally get it, because I would every now and then I'm not trying to be a smart ass, but I go, if you really look at most of the religions of the world, they're all masculine principles and masculine based. So if a woman, you being a woman, I'm talking to them, what would your religion look like? And because I know that there is a very distinct difference, and you're bringing it up. So there is something very different about how women experience the world and how they experience divinity, and that is different than the way men experience it. However, men seems to be the dominant force at the moment, and now we're starting to see a much stronger feminine voice out in the world, and so now the question is are they trying to eat the men? Men try to subject the women, and now are the women going to try to do essentially the same thing and eat the men? And now there's this whole thing about demasculating men. So I find that's not the right approach, but that's what's happening.
I don't know. I don't think that's actually what's happening. Pendulum swing one direction and then the other. And if some women come across as demasculizing men, I think it's that pendulum swing. In actuality, any group of women that I've been with that I have talked to talk about equality and the bringing about of the space where the female voice and the male voice are both loved, both respected, both listened to equally. And that is that equality, that egalitarian mindset, if you will, is a more feminine mindset.
Yeah, and you know what? It's complementary. That's the thing. Everything's complementary.
Yeah, we need both.
We're right down to about 3 minutes. Exactly, I agree. Hey, listen, we got 3 minutes left to go in the show, so I'm going to give you two things. One, is there any last words that you have about Jesus? And if you can, be quick about it. And then also just let us know what your contact information is, and then we'll just wrap up the show there, and how you can get contacted and what your books are.
Okay, great. Yes, there is one maxim that is at the top of the list for Yeshua. What?
Okay, hold on. We got 1 minute left, so I guess you're just going to have to just say, where can we contact you?
Okay. I got to give this maxim. It's be love, accept love, give love. That's it. You do that,
perfect.
You're golden. And it's easy to get a hold of me, IgniteTheLifeYouCrave.com. IgniteTheLifeYouCrave.com. You can get a hold of me on the contact page. It's all there.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, that concludes the show. Kaarin, you were terrific. Thank you so much for coming on. And I want to thank all of my listeners. I hope you enjoyed the show. And truly, I appreciate your time for listening. And again, please click the following and subscribe buttons on our channels. And you can also find me on Facebook. So without further ado, let's journey together. Good night, and have a great tomorrow.